Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ben. This is Kelley, and welcome to our new segment. Don't know exactly what we're going to call it, but me and Kelley are co-workers. Spent a lot of time together. We've had a lot of interesting conversations, and we thought we should probably film those. It's pretty interesting. We both have different perspectives and different views on things, but we agree on a lot, and in the areas we disagree, it's usually pretty minor. And we've been seeing a lot of faux journalism, a lot of fake information online. YouTube is saturated with it. The forums are saturated with it. And we're just kind of sick and tired of it. So we figured, we gotta, might as well get online and kind of give our perspectives and talk about different things that we both are interested in. And that way you guys can get a, just an honest conversation about what's going on. And, we won't spend time with these, worthless attack pieces, which you see a lot of people, kind of the Ben Shapiro crowd, this online, we're going after millennials and we're trying to get in a quick shot. But there's a lot of time wasted where people don't talk about substance, right? Nothing objective is ever reached. So a lot of time is wasted. So I thought, how don't we,
I have to add that we're a bit hypocritical in this very first piece because I've been writing on Substack, and one of the first articles that I have written is about a loop of New York Times articles, and I don't really want to get caught into the infinite loop of response reaction that a lot of YouTubers and news. I mean, that's what news is now. They're you got the primary source of something. It's often New York Times or CNN, and then everyone responds to it, and that's just what the news cycle is. But there's something particularly interesting about this story.
Yes. So Kelley sent me the story. It's an article he'd written. And he was looking at something that the New York Times had written, which, like we said, we're being kind of hypocritical in the beginning, but we're not looking at the article itself. We're responding. We're kind of looking at bias. We both have something we want to talk about. So let's just get into it. So he wrote something, sent it to me. It's called Benevolent Journal or Arm of the Security State. Now, what is the security state? That sounds like a bunch of conspiracy theory, Illuminati, tinfoil stuff. What is the security state?
It's simply, like the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, Homeland Security. It's basically the federal branches of our government that have to do with,
protecting us.
The thing.
The thing. I heard about the thing. Fox News and CNN talked about it once. So what's wrong? The NSA, they're there to save us, right? The Patriot Act, and now we're all much safer than we used to be, right? Because the FBI, they're all good. I've seen movies with the FBI.
One of the another article that I wrote actually is basically "Sins of the Left" is what it was titled, and basically it was just a list. Actually, there was no clever rhetoric or whatsoever in it, no coherency whatsoever. It was simply a list and dates of I guess you call them sins, depending on how you define them, of the security state, and sins of corporate America and Wall Street. Their biases, their misinformation ploys, and one of them was, I forget the dates, but the second time that the Trump administration had tried to bring troops back from Afghanistan. So they had this troop withdrawal plan, and they had a budget for it, obviously, and it's going to go to the House committee for a vote. And conveniently, just before the vote to block the funds or not to withdraw the troops, conveniently just before that vote, the New York Times released an article, and the article was they parroted the baseless claim that Russia paid Taliban to kill U.S. troops. And they listed some vague security state officials as their source, no specific names. You'll actually see this time and time again with the New York Times. Whenever they have a source and it's the security state, they either have vague officials making specific statements, or they have specific individuals making vague statements. And it's only one or two of those categories. It's never a specific person making a specific claim. So anyway, that claim, nothing came of it. To this day, there was still no evidence that Russia paid Taliban to kill U.S. troops.
Yeah.
Why would they even do that? I mean, we've been in the space of cyber war for years now. We're not transitioning into it. We've actually been in it for a while now. I mean, we've actually had countries where they've had nuclear weapons facilities get shut down by someone inserting code into those facilities or into their software management companies. And so, the New York Times, they conveniently released that article just before the House committee vote on blocking funds, and turns out that it worked. It worked very well. And now we're, this endless war that we've been in with the Middle East is still going.
Yeah.
Maybe there are good reasons for it. I guess the argument, the 19-year-old argument now is that 9/11 never would have happened if we'd had people there, gaining intel.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting that you have this news organization they have a lot of security state officials that work for them, past security state officials. I don't have the list on me, but it's no mere coincidence that so many security state officials transition from public work to working in the New York Times or in CNN. So they released that article, and they got exactly what they wanted, and there was no evidence for their claims.
It's interesting. It's probably parallels to this article. So let's talk about, we'll probably see the same thing here. So this article we're looking at, so you want to talk about a software security breach. Now maybe break down the breach a little bit. What is the breach that happened in brief? When did it happen? Who was involved? Who got affected?
All right, well, there's a Czech Republic software giant, and they have a quite impressive clientele list. So they released a product called Team City, and Team City was a product for testing code before you actually release it. And I mean, these things have existed for a long time, but this was the newest one, and a lot of people were using it. A lot of companies were using it. SolarWinds was one of those. And so I think the breach was anywhere from 6 to 8 months ago. And we didn't actually find out about it until 6 weeks ago or so. What happened was, what we believe happened, and by the way, this is what all follows is I've verified it's most likely true. And then the breach was supposed to have been through Team City, and then they gained access to SolarWinds. And SolarWinds, you have the list right here in front of you. Let's see here. I know this is not professional. By the way, they're a network management software company. And so essentially everyone uses them. Well, I don't actually know how many customers there are, but they report that 18,000 of their clients ended up downloading malicious programs from GNOME because they were hacked by a Russian group through Team City. And they weren't the only ones that used Team City, so there's no telling what all they have actually hacked. Microsoft reported that their source code had been viewed by these hackers. And really, what they could actually do with this information, with this hack, is they could insert code into our electrical grid, into our power plants. They could gain sensitive tax information, medical records. Most major hospitals use SolarWinds and Team City. Really, the limit to what these hackers could do with this information is it's only limited by their imagination. Now what follows, I have not been able to verify. And what you can't verify in this story is even more interesting than what you can. So, the New York Times, you learn about all this in a loop of New York Times articles, and if you learn about it from anywhere else, well, they learned about it from these New York Times articles. They were the primary source for this, because for some reason, when a very large corporate breach or any news in corporate America, Wall Street, or the security state, it almost always goes to the New York Times first. Anyway, the New York Times made a very convenient observation about the hack. And that was that U.S. servers were used for it. And I haven't been able to verify this, but the reason that I believe that they did that was because then they're able to introduce their proposed solution.
Yeah.
And their proposed solution for this breach was more power to the security state, conveniently.
Oh, how about
Right?
it?
So, like the powers like the NSA, that with their spying campaigns on America, if only they were able to better spy on us, if only more of our rights were infringed on, then they would have been able to stop this threat. And it's interesting that we have a lot of monopolies forming right now. Our antitrust enforcement for the past dozen years has basically not even existed. And we actually know that competition solves a lot of problems. Like the most recent example, and there are many, is with the vaccines. The large chains, which control about 80% of the space in vaccine development, they've completely failed.
Yeah.
In all of the states where small businesses, non-chain pharmaceuticals are dominant, in those states, vaccines were distributed more proportionate to the population. So elsewhere where you have these big chains, they were actually failing miserably because competition solves a lot of these issues. And so not once did the New York Times journalists that wrote these 4 articles, which loop through themselves, by the way. It's called circular logic.
Yeah.
You write something and you prove it by providing a source, but your source goes to this article and then this one and this one, and it forms a circle.
Yeah.
So that's not credible whatsoever. That's not real journalism. There's no real source to their articles except for vague security state officials.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, the point that I was getting to is their proposed solution was more power to these branches of our government that have no oversight whatsoever, no transparency, and a lot of funding. I mean, we fund them with our tax money. Their proposed solution was to give them more power, and not once did they mention antitrust enforcement, because these companies, they're dominating their spaces, and you're getting subpar products because there's not enough competition. So I thought that was very suspicious.
Yeah. And of course, the government, which has shown itself to be absolutely just maximize its potential with taxpayer dollars to keep us safe. It is interesting the government, the New York Times wants to give them more power, but the government in general is the biggest waster of funds and resources.
Yes.
When it's given money, like it wastes disproportionate amounts of taxpayer dollars, and it's very ineffective typically in many spaces where some private people in the market would be able to provide a much better service or much better security, or like you said, break up the monopolies, and you have more competition, which produces better products. So we'd be more secure that way than by giving the government more power.
You do get a lot of inefficiencies. Anytime that you have, and this is one of the problems with monopolies, although we're now talking about monopolies.
Specifically,
Well, I mean, it naturally leads there because it's obviously the proposed solution. Breaking up monopolies only helps us, only helps people, and the other solution only infringes on your rights even more than they already are. I know back in 2013, the FBI obtained, or was it the FBI? I don't know if it was the FBI or if it was the NSA. I get them mixed up. They're all villains to me.
It's the same thing.
They obtained authorization to sift through. It was the FBI to sift through Verizon users' communications. And communications that the NSA had been accumulating, probably illegally, and the authorization was supposed to span for 6 months, and when that 6 months ended, they didn't stop. I don't know if they ever did stop, and if they did, I don't know when.
Yeah, I don't know if they have to, because of the Patriot Act pretty much give government agencies unlimited power.
But to summarize all of this,
getting back.
To summarize all of this, essentially, you have this news organization which is over 100 years old now, I think, and they have a lot of security state officials that currently work for them. They use that to their advantage. They stopped the House committee vote by releasing an article that has, to this day, still no evidence in support of it. None whatsoever. And then they take a story which happens to be true. I mean, I watched the stocks for SolarWinds in the past 6 weeks, and they've been dropping. And the CEO did a sort of exit scam. He sold a lot of his stock before he released the information that they've been hacked. But so yeah, in summary, you got that they took this story that happened to be true, and they spun it in such a way that it would benefit the security state, more power to the security state, which is not something that is conclusive to most individuals' interests in the country.
Yeah, it's interesting that a private organization or a supposedly private organization is somehow gaining all these internal security state officials, anonymous security state officials, to come and work for them so they can have sources, and they seem to, their narrative almost always seems to be more power to the state.
They don't have anonymous security state officials working for them. You can go down their list of journalists and editors, and you can actually see, you can look these people up and see who worked where. However, when they, in their writing, in their articles, they do often list anonymous current security state officials as their sources.
Gotcha.
And the burden of proof that doesn't seem to burden them whatsoever.
Yeah, it's truly that's the story with a lot of journalists, supposed journalists, news outlets, is that a lot of them, especially leftist journalist outlets, and not just the New York Post, but they spend a lot, they're at the forefront of it, pushing it more so, is that they kind of have this combined collective narrative that they're trying to build, and they keep building and say, oh yeah, sources say, this person said, and they have this article and this article, and you don't have to worry about citing sources because you just keep pushing the narrative forward, pushing it, and 10 years down the road, all people who read the New York Times have been like, oh, of course, we need more internal security from the security state. I mean, look at all these articles, but none of the articles actually prove anything, and there's no specific information, but the narrative is really what's important.
I don't want to get into partisan politics, but something very interesting has been happening in the past 10 years, and it seems to have happened right underneath our noses. Yeah. When you were a kid in school, how many times did you hear your teachers or adults tell you that you can't believe everything that you see on the internet, that you read on the internet? And you heard that as a kid, right?
Yeah.
You don't hear that anymore. People don't really talk about that. And in fact, you saw Project Veritas's latest lawsuit that they're launching. We have lawyers and we have journalists and editors on the left, and they quite literally form their opinions off of Google searches and how much results that they'll get from something. And so we've entered, I don't know when we entered this clickbait model of news, where if you click on any one thing and you read it, you may find that it's not true. In which case you discard it, and then that is no longer in your repertoire of arguments that you're going to use. However, most people don't do that. They see a clickbait title, and that clickbait title is tied into your Google searches. You type in on your search engine, and you get that clickbait title, and you get another one beneath it, and beneath that, and beneath that. Is Project Veritas alt-right? Is Project Veritas unethical? And you get a lot of results, search results, that they would verify that claim if you believed in simply the clickbait model of journalism, which has infected journalism in I don't know how long. Yeah. And it's very interesting because, well, we don't have a whole lot of geniuses in our country, but it does appear that one side of the political spectrum seems to be a little bit more susceptible to that misinformation than the other. Yeah. And I don't actually think that those people are. I don't think those people are very different from the others. So let me speak. I'll speak frankly. Right? This is something I've been thinking about for a long time. Democrats, people who vote Democrat and people who vote Republican, I don't think they are really that different. There's something. If you're a Republican, correct?
Conservative. Conservative. Yeah.
More nuance than that, but a lot of people would label you as a Republican. A lot of people who vote Democrat, they see Trump losing this election as a victory for the common folk. And they actually believe that. They actually believe that he was a corporate elite, a corrupt corporate elite. And they think that any loss to him, it benefits people who are not sympathizers of the corrupt corporate elite and the corporate funded politicians. So let's say they're right. Then clearly, Republicans and Democrats are similar in this, because they both hate corporate America right now. They're both in fierce not both of them. Republicans are in fierce opposition of corporate America and Wall Street right now. And if you got these people on this other side, and they believe that the downfall of one person was a blow to corporate America, then we're in agreement on at least who our enemy is for the most part. They may be wrong about Donald Trump. They may be wrong about him being in league with the corrupt bureaucrats in America. But at least they still want to go after corrupt corporate America right now. And so, I mean, the biggest hurdle you could possibly overcome between these two groups it doesn't exist. That hurdle doesn't exist. They both want the same thing. It's just that one side right now is more misled than the other. And I'm not saying that this side's not misled either. This whole partisan politics thing is ridiculous. It's silly. If you were a corporate elite or a Wall Street elite or a security state official, you would want the common people bickering amongst themselves about petty things like this. You wouldn't want them to turn their sights onto you.
Which may be why the New York Times conspiracy theory kind of seeping in, maybe kind of like an arm of the government, because it's more, you don't need to just waste time on clickbait titles, like you said, or you waste time on infighting, you waste time looking at non-issues, you set up a bunch of straw men, and then people go and chop it down and say, we got a victory. Look at that, we beat this thing that doesn't really exist. And you waste a lot of people's time, arguing about things that don't exist instead of going after the real issues of the real people. Which seems like the New York Times does that a lot. This is why we both actually wanted to look at things from the New York Times, because we wanted to show that there's obviously bias, corruption, deceit, and just, I don't know, it's hard to chalk up to ignorance when you read things like this. You're like, these people just don't know what they're talking about. But it's hard to say that when you're at that level of journalism, to be like, I guess he just didn't know. Like that seems like you're extremely inept or you have to be lying. Like it seems like it's one or the other.
This is a real issue that these people are, that half of people in America are falling for these clickbait titles. It's a real issue. And the partisan politics, the you filthy Democrat rhetoric doesn't work. If a liberal walked in here right now and used that same rhetoric against you as a person who tends to vote Republican, it wouldn't work on you. It wouldn't do anything for you. At some point, Republicans are going to have to start talking, And I mean, I know that there's a lot of meme warfare that they engage in. And as funny as that is, it hasn't been working. It doesn't work. At some point, we're gonna have to say, hey, we kind of want the same things, but we got to sift through the information and find out what is good and what is bad, and not be so easily offended. But you recently read an article by the New York Times that you wanted to talk about, right?
I did.
So, in Biden's Catholic Faith and Ascendant Liberal Christianity, published by the New York Times, Elizabeth Dias on January 23rd. What was your take on this article?
I was thinking, I've never heard of Ascendant Liberal Christianity was first thing.
What does that mean?
I don't know. I mean, ascendant, so like high above, superior maybe? Superior liberal?
Ascendant means a rising.
It
means you're a relic of the past. That's what they're saying about you.
Well, I do identify with a bunch of first century Jews, so. So that does, she's right there actually. It's just
Was there any content to this article whatsoever?
No, it was a fluff piece. It was a fluff piece pretty much. It was really weird because we were talking before we started rolling how we've never heard of Biden's Catholic faith. Like even when he was vice president, I don't remember how, like there was kind of a small period where they were trying to talk about Obama and how he was supposedly a Christian, but then they started watching videos of his pastor at the church he supposedly attended, and he's this really bizarre extremist liberation theologian. And very brief, like liberation theology is based on like Marxist theology, pretty much.
Right.
So it's the idea that whatever race or people is being oppressed, they insert themselves into the biblical narrative. So they kind of work themselves into Scripture, and so they just they utilize Scripture in order to get whatever it is they want.
Oh, so it's an ideology based on victimhood.
Yeah, in a way. Which is
it for the sake of victimhood in itself and the sort of social status that victimhood brings, or is this a handle for Marxism to take place?
I think it probably started off more honestly in a way, because it primarily started in Latin America, South America. So it was, there were a lot of communism flourished down there for a time, even in Cuba still today. So it was kind of these people, they would look at the Bible and they might have like found themselves in Scripture, or like identified their struggle with what was happening to the first century Jews and Christians. And so I think it may have started honestly, but it has definitely morphed into like a Marxist ideology, where it's kind of like the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, the haves, the have-nots, and so they utilize Scripture and they find themselves in Scripture, and then they twist Scripture in order to fit whatever it is that they're trying to get. So it's whatever it might have started as, it is definitely morphed.
And so this ties into this article.
Yeah, it is interesting because I'm assuming like the ascendant liberal Christianity is pretty much kind of bonded with liberation theology, like Raphael Warnock, the way he preaches and things like that. So I'm assuming that's she's trying to push forth that kind of Christianity or Christendom, to be a very general. We could include Catholicism in that. But yeah, just the reason I found it interesting because A, it was New York Times, so we're looking at the same source, and B, the idea that they're trying to push Biden's Catholicism as if he's some kind of observant Catholic,
right?
Especially with the positions that he holds, which are extremely contrary to, Roman Catholic tradition. It's just obviously there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of lies in here.
Do you think that this was in response to his recent ratings drop?
Could be, yeah. I think in the article it is interesting that they mention that the majority of Christians, I don't know how correct their number is, but they said that somewhere upwards of like 80% of Christians or people that fall under the Christian umbrella vote Republican. So that only leaves 20%. It could be even less than that, but 20% of people who would claim Christianity in some way, shape, or form vote Democrat. So it feels like it was written like, oh yeah, we're going to try to capture some of that Republican market,
right,
by pretending that Biden is an observant Roman Catholic, which he is very obviously not. It's very interesting.
Well, I remember throughout the Obama administration that a lot of people online mused about Obama potentially being an atheist because he didn't speak like other presidents spoke. He never really mentioned God or religion. In fact, it appeared that it was a topic that he tried to avoid.
Yeah.
And how do you think Biden fits in with that?
I think he would obviously not. I don't think he fits into anything this person is claiming about him,
right,
and his religious convictions, whatever they may be. I think he much more was like Obama. Like religion was much more of an issue that they tried to avoid, maybe because they didn't want to ruffle the waters, or they already felt there was other things they could address, and so they left religion and Christianity out of it. But the fact that like neither one of us can remember anything about Biden's Catholicism for 8 years of Obama's administration and now his administration in like the past 40, however many years he's been in office.
47, I believe.
Crazy amount. So longer than both of us have been alive.
Of course, his newfound faith could be sincere, but it is quite the coincidence, isn't it?
Well, So speaking of this newfound faith, I conspiracy theory time, but it does seem interesting that in the article, and it's been updated, that they talk about Pope Francis, who is now the Pope in the Vatican. He's been there for about 5 or 6 years, and he is much more of a liberation theology Marxist Pope. Like he's much more of a what we label social justice, right? The poor, the needy, sexual exploitation, minorities, things like that. He had some brief spouts with Trump over the border, the wall, the Mexican border wall. So it is interesting that all of a sudden Biden has this Catholic faith given to him by the New York Times.
Right.
And then connecting him to Pope Francis, who just happens to be a progressive leftist
Right.
in his ideology.
So, for someone who hadn't read this article,
Yeah.
is is the entire article summarized in its title?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, so go read the title and the subtitle again. It's just interesting, both of them.
In Biden's Catholic faith and ascendant liberal Christianity, President Biden, perhaps the most religiously observant commander-in-chief in half a century, speaks of how his Catholic faith grounds his life and his policies.
Yeah, well, that's news to me.
It's news to me as well.
Yeah, the most religious. Yeah.
This sort of goes into the last discussion about Google searches, Google results. Well, search engine results in general, not just Google. And that now, if anyone types in Biden or Catholicism, there's a result that comes up with it. And it could be a coincidence. It could be a simple, it most likely is a coincidence. It's most likely a symptom of what we were talking about earlier with the clickbait method.
Yeah.
And the way that search engines pull results. But conveniently, when you do type in anything into, this is going to show up now.
Yeah.
And it happens just like that. They wrote one article, effortless article, required very little effort. They wrote it, it'll show up in any search now. You type in Biden and Catholicism.
Yeah. And the first, and like, it's a pretty lengthy article, so most people aren't even going to waste their time reading all of it. So they'll like, oh yeah, the title, okay, he's a Catholic, he's ascendant liberal. They'll read the subtitle and they might get a couple paragraphs in. Be like, oh cool, hey, I didn't know Biden was that. And so people who are on the left, or are Democratic leaning in their votings, who identify as Christian, or even people who might have been kind of middle ground, might be like, oh, I can now find a connection, a religious safe space. I hate to use that word. On the left, that I can now feel, I can feel good, being there, because our president is Catholic. He's the most religious person in half a decade. Which, I mean, against Trump, that's not saying much.
You have anything else to add on this?
No, I think I just want to point out, because obviously, if you go onto my channel, like Christianity is where I spend most of my time looking, and I just found it it's just obviously a fluff piece. So much of it is anti-Christian, anti-biblical, even anti-Roman Catholic.
Right.
Historically and even presently, their dogmatic statements on marriage, which maybe, I'd argue will be changing, because I'm pretty sure Francis is going to open up that area, much in the same way the Supreme Court did. Abortion and just all the issues that Roman Catholics would have identified as Republican earlier are going to start probably switching, and then like I said, the people will find they may feel much freer to swing left on their views, or Democratic in their views,
right?
Because they'll feel that there's almost like a religious outlet now, whereas before they may have felt unable to do that.
This tactic seems to actually be kind of old. If I'm correct, it seems to be directly in line with their play on definitions. Which they've been at for a long time now. I don't know how long, possibly since the neoliberalization of universities. I know I don't know if this really pertains to this article a whole lot, but Pew Research, which people may not be familiar with the title PEW Research. It's a facility in DC, and they publish statistical analysis, although it's absent real statistical analysis. And they misuse statistics to further progressive movements. They do this by playing with definitions. So when I was attending university, you would see posters up on the walls where it would say like 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5 women at campuses are raped. And that would be a national crisis if that were true.
It's a huge number. 80% of women.
You would have a hard time, finding any point in history where you're reaching those numbers. You'd have a hard time with it.
Genghis Khan. Maybe.
They did it simply by changing the definition of rape.
Mm-hmm.
And they were actually doing this in, well, I hate to use the word legitimate articles, but within those within the realm of those soft sciences. They would play with the definition of rape until they actually got the numbers that they want to further their agenda. And I was just wondering if maybe this was something like that. They're playing with the definition of Christianity to further their agenda.
Could be. Yeah, I guess it would depend on how broad you want to open the spectrum to Christianity. I think maybe a better word, like if you're talking about Christianity in the broadest sense, you could say Christendom. That term doesn't get used a lot, but Christendom would be, generally encapsulate anything that had to do with Christianity historically. That's a pretty broad definition, but I would imagine that they're 80% of, or they said, 80% of Christians vote Republican. Well, what fits into the definition of Christianity? Because I'm assuming they would probably put Mormons in there, they would put Jehovah's Witnesses, they would put Christian Science, Latter Day, they would put all these different subsets that claim Christian heritage. Might be a better way to say that, but are obviously not Christian and have long ago left any root that they had with them. But as long as you make the Christianity, the version or the definition of Christianity as broad as you want to, you can fit anything under there. It's like an umbrella term. So yeah, they probably are doing that a lot with this title and with, like we said, in titles in general. How many, headlines have we read where you're just reading the headline, if you didn't read it, you wouldn't really know what they're talking about. Are they being specific? Are they being non-specific? Who are they talking about? Are they being talking about a certain group or a smaller group? Hello, third member. Yeah, that is probably a bit of what's going on here, on top of the New York Times just obviously going to ball for the leftist candidate. That's probably obviously a lot of at the heart of this is that they're, trying to gain favor for their candidate.
I have a question about Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
This recent wave of progressive movements where they search for a group that they view as victims, whether they're victims or not doesn't actually seem to matter.
Yeah.
And they say these are victims, our society must change so that they are no longer victims.
Mm-hmm.
These are victims, we have to help them in some way.
Yeah.
Is this at all in league with Christian values? The idea of group responsibility over individual?
Not really. Even if there's a group aspect to an idea coming out of Christianity, there's still individualistic responsibility. For instance, Paul talks about, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember off the top of my head, maybe in the book of Galatians. So when he's writing to the church in Galatia, one of the things he mentions is that we need to take care and give special attention to widows. Because widows at that time, especially in the first century and before that, if you were a woman and your husband died, it was much harder for you to live. Much harder for you to, you didn't have jobs. It was harder for you to own land. Almost no women own land or property or houses. And so they were actually, in that sense, a true victim. Right. Your husband dies, you don't have a job, you don't have a house, if you don't have kids, or even if you do have kids, what do? So Paul says, hey, these people need help, because he doesn't use the word victim, obviously, but he says, they're disadvantaged, and there's, societally and socially, they need help. And obviously if they're a member of the church, we consider them our sister. Or, if somebody older, they die and they're in their 70s and their husband passes, well, they're not able to physically work. So we go, okay, well, they need help. They're a member of our Christian family, so we should help them, which, is perfectly acceptable.
Right.
But even then, it's not okay, every single widow who is out there, we have to, take refunds and divert this. And, the way that it's spelled out in society today is much less different. And it would be much more even individualistic, because he's writing to a certain church. He's like, hey, the widows at your church, he says that I see specifically more of a problem here with widows than I do here. So even then, it's more specific to a certain area.
Well, I guess my next question would be, so we were driving through Atlanta and we saw a billboard that said, "Give your tithe money to Black trans women."
Yes.
Correct, word for word. That's what it said.
Yes.
So, do you think that the trauma, the circumstances that befell a widow is comparable to identifying as a Black trans woman?
No, it's not, because first off, being trans is a choice, right? It's a very conscious choice that you make.
You could choose to murder your husband, and
well, we wouldn't give you any money then. Be a what is it, like a conscious widow?
Yeah.
Yeah, so only unconscious widows get money. Yeah, then that'd be preposterous, because obviously, well,
one is the subject of trauma, and the other is subject of choice.
yes, personal choice. Now, people say, "Well, I was born trans." There's no research that shows that at all. Obviously, it's a choice. And it is interesting that if you are in the Christian community, you see a lot of videos and you hear a lot of stories of people who were trans and they become Christians, and then all of a sudden they're not trans anymore. Well, if you were born trans, but then you become a Christian, you go, "Oh, okay, yeah, that was actually a choice I made," and then you what they call it, deconvert, or I don't know what it's called, transition back. Yeah, detransition. That's what it's called. So to say, "Oh yeah, see," and so we're Christians and we're supposed to be giving, and so we need to tie to this group of people who are proportionately disadvantaged, but those people put themselves because of that choice. And the idea that, oh, they're and it's like it's part of this victimhood too, in the left there's like a victimhood, like, I don't know, hierarchy. Like, so they're Black, so they're part of a minority, and then they're trans. Oh, so that puts them in. So now they have two groups. Right? They're identified with not only being a minority, but they're a smaller minority of that minority. Also, they fit into two groups. So now they're extremely victimized. Right? So they have this like ladder that you go down. You're like, okay, you're a victim here, but you're also a victim here. Oh, so you need more attention.
And anyone can play that game.
Yes, of course.
Who in life could not make the argument that they've been a victim at one point or another?
Of course.
Yeah. Anyone can. Victimhood is also something that you choose.
Yes.
And so the original question was, is this idea of victimhood, a societal change centered around the discussion of victimhood, is it consistent with Christian values? And you pointed out to an instance where widows were being singled out for public support, but we've just discussed that they're not really the same idea of a victimized group as the left is currently using. So would you conclude that Christian values they're not really consistent with this idea of victimhood?
No.
Progressive victimhood?
No, I would never. I can't even think of an instance where.
In all my learnings of Christianity, it seems like personal responsibility, you reap what you sow.
Yes.
Is a prevalent theme throughout Scripture.
Yes, very Old Testament and New Testament. And when Paul's writing to the church in Thessalonica, it's the book of Thessalonians. And when I say a letter, it's originally, just clarify real quick that we say book now in English, but originally they were letters. So when Paul's writing when you read the book of Thessalonians, it's Paul writing to the church in Thessalonica. But we just call them books now because of English and whatnot.
Why didn't they call them scrolls?
Oh, because scrolls were done away with historically.
At that point?
For the most part, Christians actually invented the modern book. That may be something to look at later.
Interesting.
That'd be
What they used for the backing?
Well, it was softback, no hardback.
Oh, okay.
So they called the codex. It was double-sided. There's a lot of history there. Well, I don't know how to change it. I could talk all day. But yeah, no, even in the book of Thessalonians, Paul's like, yeah, if you don't work, you don't eat. Because there's even then, there was this idea that, yeah, we just gotta, maybe you'd be like, yeah, I'm part of I'm a youth pastor, and so I don't have to do any hard work, and so I'm being religious, I need money to whatever. And Paul's like, get the heck out of here. Like, yeah, I'm paraphrasing, but not that you can't, be in ministry and receive money for that and have pastors, but the idea that, you just get a free ride, like, let's get on, disability and welfare and this and that, and we'll just be carried because Christianity is all about giving people who need stuff. Yeah, there's no biblical basis for that. Like, if you're a true victim, and I don't even like using the word victim, like if you've truly experienced tragedy, that'd be a better way. Then, yes, you need support. But even then, when he's talking about supporting the widows, he's talking about the church. He doesn't say, yeah, the government needs to support widows. He's like, no, you people at this church, those are your family members. So he's not like, we need government grants.
Do you think, I wasn't planning on asking this question, it's just, but do you think that there was a conscious decision to choose Catholicism for his newfound faith rather than non-Catholic Christianity?
For the new pope?
No, for Biden.
Oh, for Biden? Yeah, I would say, I don't know. I'm assuming he probably has identified in the past very nominally as Catholic. Like,
Or grew up in an area that was predominantly Catholic.
Yeah, like his parents were Catholic, or his grandparents were Catholic, or, the Northeast especially is much more bathed in Catholicism. There was much more bigger majority up there. So I'm assuming he probably had some very nominal Catholicism. If I had to venture a guess, I'd say it's probably because Pope Francis is so progressive and so liberal, and he sounds so much like the Democratic Party in a lot of ways, like that.
Well, don't use that.
Yeah, that's being broad. That's being broad. Yeah, much more progressive. Like he sounds much more. He's much more into promoting, the victimhood mentality. Mm-hmm. Like the way he speaks sounds a lot like leftist rhetoric that I hear a lot, versus a lot of conservative rhetoric. So I would, if I had to venture a guess, I'd say this is a fluff piece, and Biden is trying to connect somehow with and garner votes by trying to establish some kind of a religious base with some religious voters.
Right.
So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the only reason. I wouldn't be surprised if him and Francis meet in the future and they, have some kind of
touch elbows.
Some kind of holy high five. Do the rub. You can't kiss the ring because that's breaking social distance. I don't know what he's gonna do. I don't even know if he has a ring. He did get a smaller throne this Pope, so he's so humble. He stepped it down.
It's, only like 30 pounds less gold.
Yeah. Just for you silver.
It's solid silver, not solid gold.
Yeah, we melted down the gold throne and made some more idols. Anyways, go all the way back. Yeah, so because there's so much behind all this. Like when you read an article, like we could spend hours talking about the backstory and why, Catholicism, like why I wouldn't say Catholicism is Christianity, and why he's obviously not Catholic, and why the new Pope and Biden's Catholicism contradicts traditional conservative Roman Catholicism. But the New York Times doesn't care. And that's the point. Like they're just trying to push a narrative like they were, as we were talking earlier, because they have a goal and they do whatever they need to reach that goal.
Well, they clearly serve the security state.
Yes, clearly.
They clearly want the never-ending war and on terror.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but they clearly want that. They're willing to push misinformation at opportune moments to keep the war going. So they clearly want it. I don't know why yet.
I have a small theory on that. So I think,
what is it?
Not conspiracy theory. I think because most military would identify as conservative or Republican, or they would vote Republican. So and then the military gets a lot of attention. They get a lot of praise. There's a lot of pride in American history with the military. Like we identify with them because there's a lot of military and a lot of veterans. And so if you don't want such a large, powerful, loud, conservative contingent to be there, it's easier to have them continuing this never-ending war, because then
you don't want them on American soil.
Yeah,
you don't want that conservative presence here.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
So I think that's probably a big part of it.
We might be onto something there.
I know, I'm a genius. But yeah, I think that's part of it, because it's just like the physical distance, and you're fighting for your life. You're in a in a hole in the middle of Afghanistan. You're like, oh, waking up, time to get sniped. You're trying not to get
when your life is in danger, or when you're cold every night.
Yeah.
These problems, you view them from a different perspective. They do seem pretty petty. Yeah,
you're like, oh, who cares, Biden, whatever. You got bigger things to worry about.
I want you here, man. I don't even like you.
Yeah, so we have a third guest that showed up. Yes, and we did have, so that was the two main topics, and we did have one final topic we wanted to talk about. And we wanted to mention that if gnomes are real,
All right, so if gnomes existed,
if gnomes, which they probably do. Let's just say they probably do.
If gnomes existed, what would the warfare between humanity and the gnomes look like? Would if these little humanoid creatures sprung out of the ground in our gardens,
Yeah.
And first of all, what would property rights look like?
That's true, because property rights are traditionally, we think about property rights in a 2D horizontal plane. But what if you had a third dimension and you go vertical?
Well, I mean, we have mineral rights in America.
Well,
America's the only country in the world where you can own beneath the surface.
Yeah, which is nice.
It's mostly nice. So people, I don't want to get on off of this.
Yeah.
I'll go on forever.
Yeah, I don't want to go on the thing. I want to be ridiculous. Let's talk about gnomes.
We should talk about gnomes.
Yeah.
Clearly, if this guy is living on this land, and someone who owns this land wants to sell it to you, well, no party considers, well, what about this feline that's running around on it? I mean, what percent of the land belongs to him? So, would humanity have viewed gnomes as equals, and granted them a percent of how he's doing something he doesn't like? I hope they could hear that.
He's a racist against gnomes. He doesn't like their race.
I'm just gonna keep poking him until he leaves. He'll get annoyed.
Yeah.
Gets annoyed very easily, as you just saw.
Yes,
he got annoyed and not even do anything.
He just hates gnomes. He's a bigot. But yeah. So gnomes. I mean, they have to. How long do they have squatters' rights? Maybe we're the squatters. Are we the invasive species?
I mean, we're creatures of this earth, just as they are. So I mean, it has to be 50-50.
Right.
Well, honestly, the only thing that really matters is, could they defeat us in warfare? Because if they could, then they would be viewed as equals.
That's true.
Because people forget, because they have they lead these cushiony lives with very little adversity, very little violence.
Mm-hmm.
The people believe that they're just granted certain amenities at no consequence.
Yeah.
When really, you only gain territory, you only hold territory by force.
Yeah.
You only get anything in life by force.
Mm-hmm.
And modern people don't really understand that. So, if gnomes existed, and if we could crush them in just a month, then
crush them because they're short. Yeah.
That 50-50 is not going to happen.
No.
But if they were able to stand their ground and maybe starve us out by eating all of our carrots, before disappearing back on the ground,
you just pull them from the root.
You got half of your society starving, and then half of them are getting killed.
Yeah.
At some point you might be like, all right, well, property rights are have to divide it 50-50.
Yeah.
Would there have been a point in history if garden gnomes existed? Would there have been a point? Would there have been a point in history where they had enslaved humanity by starving them out and basically saying, "You grow food for us, or you starve"?
It would have been early, all the early archaic.
Yeah, because
tales.
You ever shot a gopher by sitting there and waiting for it to pop its head up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, it would have been before firearms.
So at least 100 years ago.
I get this image now, this art piece someone painted 800 years ago.
Yeah.
Someone holding a bow and just waiting for a gnome to poke his head out of a hole.
Somebody wanted to cover it up, so they drew a dragon.
Yeah. So the world would never know that we wiped out gnomes forever.
Yeah. It was probably the Egyptians saved us. They built pyramids and weapons of war. So pre 1500 BC was the Great Gnome War.
I imagine rednecks going to their backyard.
Yeah,
and finding every small hole and pouring gasoline down it like they do with anthills.
I'm gonna burn them out. Coming to my country. Rednecks are gonna win the war. The next Great War. No more.
So what was our say that they did exist at some point?
Yeah.
What was our theory for what happened to them? Do they still exist or no?
Oh, certainly they're in the Hollow Earth. Obviously, they retreated underground.
No.
Into the Hollow Earth. So they're below us, and they have an advanced civilization That's where Atlantis came from, all these various tales, where they just caught a snippet of the gnome society's technology. They didn't understand what it was, and they came back and they created great fables about, sky gods and, these weird suns and things. But it turns out they were just hollow, and the gnomes went underground.
Maybe, they come up from time to time and steal food from us. Still, we've perfected agriculture. We've grown on such large scales that we don't even notice, when like an acre of it goes missing.
Yes, that's true.
I think that there was some inbreeding going on.
Probably.
And that now we have human-sized gnomes walking amongst us as we speak, and we just don't even know that they're gnomes.
Or they just call them giant gnomes. And that's all the alien abduction cases. That explains it.
Are we giant gnomes?
Oh yeah, some kind of genetic offspring, like a fluke of nature, like some kind of natural selection thing that happened on a fluke, and then our society just like overpowered them.
Yeah, we're talking about species and like how does a species form a society, something as complex as a society where they're producing goods, they're altering their environments, they're passing on information. But I feel like most people, when they think about like people they look at octopus is octopi. They look at an octopus and they say, look, they're so smart, and they clearly could manipulate their environment if they wanted to with their tentacles, and they are very, very smart. They're very clever.
Yeah.
There are a lot of experiments of them solving some pretty complicated problems. So people wonder, well, why haven't they like made a society yet? Well, one of the there's two reasons. First, they live like 7 years. They just don't live long enough to acquire enough knowledge to actually pass it down. And second, they maybe they are social enough and intelligent enough where they could come up with a symbolic representation of the world, which is what a language is. If they were able to do that, then they would actually be able to, and they were able to live longer. They'd be able to pass on knowledge to future generations, and then every generation builds on the last, and before that, and before that. And that's why these species, they can't form societies, because you have to. If you had an eagle or a hawk and it was 10 times smarter than us, well, that's not enough in its own, because they're not social animals. And even if it lived 100 years, say it lived 100 years, it was 10 times smarter than us. I mean, there might be some significant advancements that an eagle would make within its lifetime, but they're not social enough to ever pass it down. They're not so that's one of the key features of a species being able to form a society. It has to be highly social, and it doesn't even have to be highly intelligent, right? How many humans have you talked to now in your life?
I've been to Walmart.
You've been to Walmart. It doesn't even have to be that intelligent. It just has to be highly social. And it has to be able to manipulate its environment. If it's just smart enough for language to take root, then that's all the intellect it really needs.
Maybe that's the problem with gnomes, is that there's lots of them, because they can reproduce, but they're just self-centered jerks.
Self-centered jerks. They're solitary hunters.
Just like the octopi.
They don't need a group. They don't need a group. They can just come in to your garden, eat some carrots and some beets, and then leave.
And what if maybe they're so ancient, like they're like 800 years old, but they're still antisocial.
Yeah.
So they never die.
all the tricks up its sleeve, but it doesn't ever pass it down.
Yeah. It knows all these things, but it's like, freaking hate Fred. They got a beef from like this 2nd century that they never reconciled, and that's why gnomes can't own property in America, because
they're not social enough.
That's true. They're not social. They're jerks, and they don't like the Constitution.
They don't like the Constitution.
No, gnomes are communists. Almost certainly.
Wait. Aren't communists like the epitome of socialism? Well, I mean, I didn't literally mean the economic and political socialism, but the actual word socialism.
Yeah, very collective. Yeah, they're very collective. Yeah, well, maybe they got something going on. We just don't know about it yet. They might be on some of those gnomes. Well, that's food for thought for the next video. Thanks for joining us. This has been interesting. Spent some time talking about some real topics. Looking at the New York Times, looking at biases and corruption. And that was the main point of the video, minus the gnome stuff. But we just, we wanted people to think, because we're both kind of sick and tired of seeing non-issues be discussed, seeing straw men destroyed by both sides, not just the New York Times. It happens all the time. Every time you go onto YouTube, and even Republicans, conservative, we mentioned Ben Shapiro. Like, you go to watch a Ben Shapiro video.
Actually, this should be a full-blown topic that we actually talk about.
It should be, yeah.
Let's take it away. I've, as you mentioned, we've both been very frustrated, and it's not that either of us are such simpletons that we want to see the advancement of the Republican Party.
Yes.
You know? No. No, bunch of useless sops in the Republican Party. A lot of politicians that are ineffective. There are a lot of politicians that are on the left, but that are Republican because they're corporate bought.
Yeah.
We're frustrated with all the anti-left sentiment on YouTube specifically.
Yeah.
That is entirely ineffective. You have people like Ben Shapiro, and he's got millions of subscribers.
Yeah.
And Tim Pool, he has over 1 million subscribers. Crowder, you got up and comers. Matt Walsh.
Yeah.
You got all these guys, and they are clever, and they're hardworking, and their heart's in the right place, but their incompetence knows no bounds.
Yeah.
Unless of course their entire purpose is just to gain views on YouTube, and they're incompetent because of this reason right here. They're all anti-left speakers, but they never ask the question, like, what are the power centers in America?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we're railing against these progressive movements, which are not grounded in logic whatsoever. And if they are grounded in anything, it's misguided statistics, which are very easily disproven. But they rail against these democratic politicians, progressive policies, and progressive movements. This low-hanging fruit. Yeah. And I mean, how many years have they been at it now? How many years has Tim Pool been at it? How many years has Ben Shapiro been at it? Yeah. You know, they seem to have an infinite store of patience. I don't have that, and I don't think you do either. Yeah. And the left is getting worse. And these incompetent imbeciles, they don't even know any better. They don't actually know that the left is getting worse because they don't know what the left is. They don't really they don't look at a socialist movement like feminism, for instance, and see, is there actually a motive behind this? Is there actually a brain behind this? Because, you know, all of the feminist talking points are easily refuted. And I use them as an example, but you can easily insert BLM or Antifa, although Antifa is a little bit different. We can give that some other time. Yeah. But anyways, the talking points of these movements are ridiculous. They're easily refutable. And so, like, in these sessions, these Ben Shapiro and Tim Pool sessions, they've turned into places where people go to vent their frustrations, not places where people go to solve problems. And, well, they're places where, you know, you go to where they've drawn people in so that they can earn a living. And they're earning a living right now by venting problems. They're not earning a living by solving problems. Occasionally they hit on important topics, but I'm tired. I'm so tired of the just blatant incompetence and how they're only focused on the symptoms of a problem. They're not really examining the problem.
Yeah, they spend a lot of time attacking secondary or peripheral issues.
Of course.
Or if you, mostly it's, I didn't even think about that. Now I'm thinking like other like Hodge twins and these other, you know, people that are on YouTube that are conservative voices. They spend a lot of time like just mocking. Like if you know, I use Ben Shapiro because he's one of the most well, like everybody's heard of him. Most people have heard of him. Yeah. But if you look at a Ben Shapiro video, like every title's the same, like Shapiro slams SJW feminists, and it's like a 3-minute clip of him just like shutting down a freshman college student.
And they're full of false equivalencies.
Yes,
they a lot of these a lot of these logical fallacies that they're finding, they're not actually logical fallacies, because they pull a statement from this group and a statement from this group, and they say, look how inconsistent their statements are, and they in their minds they group these two groups together, and so they say, well, they're inconsistent. Well, you can be allies with someone that you're consistent with. If you have no inconsistencies, then you're simply a group.
Yeah.
That's what a group is, for the most part.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're full of false equivalencies. I know that the new YouTuber Matt Walsh, I mean, I'm a fan of these people.
Yeah.
I am a fan of them, but I'm tired of their incompetence. I'm tired of the false equivalencies, which the irony is completely lost on them, by the way. When they point out the left of the very same logical fallacies that they're guilty of, like these false equivalencies, the left is, the left is really bad about that.
Yeah.
They don't know what the left is, and they fail miserably.
Yeah.
In their mission to, Ben Shapiro made a statement recently about, essentially, my summary of his statement is, if only we changed our rhetorical style and became even more of the majority, then we would win. Yeah. So essentially, if we just spoke different, if we just acted different, and if only libertarians, conservatives, and classical liberals were even more anti-left, then we would win. But that's been happening for years now. Yeah. And every way that we could speak has happened. What nonsense? Yeah. What nonsense? Is he even trying at this point?
Yeah, and I think he does a disservice to a lot of people, and to the left and to the right, too, because a lot of times they paint the left as ignorant. Like, they spend a lot of time mocking and, look, like you said, like trying to find these false equivalencies and trying to make them look ignorant. So in a lot of people's minds, they're like, oh, they look at the left, like, oh, look at all these idiots over there. Like, those people aren't dumb. Like, the security state, the Democrats, Biden's in office, Obama was in office 4 years behind him. A lot of these politicians have been in power for decades. They're not ignorant, but what they're doing is they're just doing these.
Don't forget Bush.
Yeah.
Bush was very left.
Yeah,
very left. Obviously not Democrat, but very left.
Yes.
He was. I think his era was the era that launched, and it could have been before him. I'm still a young man. His era was he launched, not launched, but that's when you really started to see antitrust enforcement decline. Then antitrust enforcers, which, by the way, they're 3 out of 5 of them are Republican. Yeah. And so that's your clue right now, right there. That it's not Republican versus Democrat. It never has been. It's not liberal versus conservative, or neoliberal versus neoconservative. It's corporate Wall Street and the security state versus the people. Yeah. And it's been that way for a while. Mergers have run rampant. At one point we'll get into actual mergers. Although I'd be stuck reading from a list of mergers that have happened. Mergers that people should know about. But that's essentially what the left is. There's agendas and progressive movements, and then there's the driving forces, the things that have the spawning powers, the things that have all the money to throw at politicians, and they throw them at both Democrat and Republican. Yeah. They not once have I ever heard any of those YouTubers we just mentioned talk about mergers. Yeah. They wouldn't even know where to begin. I've got a list in front of me of mergers, and that most people in America have never even heard of some of these companies. Yeah. And no one talks about it. No one talks about it. No one talks about the security state misinformation and the security state's chosen media outlets like CNN and the New York Times. No one really. Sometimes you'll hear Ben Shapiro talk about it, but then he's right back in the same hole he was in, talking about ridiculous symptoms of a problem. And maybe those symptoms, maybe there are people who are sincerely feminist. Not probably, I know there are. Yeah. But the movement itself would never have lasted if it wasn't being funded. And if it didn't have papers being produced with little to no statistical analysis on them.
Yeah, it is interesting. So they spend a lot of time, like I mentioned earlier, attacking straw men that don't exist, or wasting their time looking at peripheral issues. When they could be looking at the heart of the issue, or like where the source of the funding is coming from. They could be spending a lot of time looking at real issues, but they spend a lot of time looking at surface level society. I don't know, like the way people interact in society. They spend a lot of time looking at like college campuses, which is very interesting. And I think a lot of that is Shapiro, because he does a lot of speaking there. A lot of these other people, Michael Knowles, who works with Ben Shapiro, a lot of these people speak at college campuses, and some of it is interesting in a way, because you do kind of get a feel of what's going on these liberal campuses, because you see the mindset of the people. You're like, okay, that's interesting, but you're wasting a lot of time, because you can, like sitting there and attacking a freshman who's trying to argue, some kind of SJW narrative is irrelevant, because that person's not the president of that college. Like, you're not affecting them, you're not affecting the staff, you're not affecting the curriculum or the education or what's being taught. You're just attacking a random student. So if you would instead,
a random movement, because that student is symbolic of a movement, but a periphery movement nonetheless.
Yes, which is secondary to what is lying behind it. Yeah. So if you would, even if he just would approach those students differently, now you wouldn't get as many views because it wouldn't be as clickbaity, but you would make some actual change. Like if somebody came up to you and, asked you a question the way, or, said something to Ben Shapiro the way they do, Ben Shapiro would actually engage them in a regular manner, give them real information without being sarcastic or, offensive, then you might see more change. Because, people do that, like, let's say if you and I were talking, right? Like, I'm conservative Christian, you're not, and you're like, yeah, Christians, freaking idiot, I heard online that, Constantine made your Bible and blah, blah, and I was like, none of that is relevant to me, because you're just being a jerk.
Right.
So I'm already, emotionally cut off, and then my mental capabilities are shut down. Because I don't care what you have to say, because it's irrelevant, because I think you're a jerk. So I'm like, he's a jerk. I'm not going to waste my time looking at him. And then you turn around and you go, okay, I'm going to go look for something else to reaffirm myself. And I think that's what a lot of conservatives do, is to see these liberal democratic attacks, and they go, I'm going to go watch some Ben Shapiro. I get to feel good.
Yeah.
Like, I feel emotionally bolstered right now. Heck yeah. Suck it, SJW. And it's like, nothing's been accomplished.
No,
You've wasted time. You wasted time, you wasted my time, you wasted your time.
And who believes anymore in pointing out a logical inconsistency within BLM actually makes any difference?
Mm-hmm.
Who would believe something like that anymore?
Yeah.
Or in feminism or in any progressive movement?
Mm-hmm.
No one.
Yeah.
No one believes that anymore. Like these YouTube channels have become echo chambers to vent frustrations.
Yeah.
As we've already mentioned, they and not once when they go to these campuses, and a lot of students are actually when they graduate, they're very anti-corporate, very anti-corporate. Yeah. But they still overwhelmingly vote Democrat.
Yeah.
And now I'm not saying that it is that you got corporate America on the Democratic side and non-corporate America on the Republican side. You don't. That is absolutely not true.
Yeah.
But you do have slightly more proportionally Democratic politicians being corporate bought than Republican.
Yeah.
And you have a lot more talking points on the Democratic side that's left than you do on the Republican side.
Yeah.
But they don't go to these campuses and talk about these things.
Yeah.
They go to these campuses and they berate fringe movements that don't matter.
Yeah.
There's a reason that I don't berate Nazis or that I don't berate the KKK, because they're insignificant.
Yeah.
They don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't mattered for a very long time.
Yeah.
I don't care about 30 people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
They don't mean anything. They're not going to make any significant change. And of course, there is a slight difference. One of them is massively funded, and the other is not. And one of them, its perceived victimhood is used to further agendas. Mm-hmm. But attacking it doesn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
When feminism lost traction, something else just took its place.
Yeah.
And when anti-BLM sentiments rise, something else is simply going to take its place. They're going to find some group that they can argue vainly is a victimized group.
Yeah.
And they don't need a specific group. They just need a group.
Yeah.
They want a group.
Yeah.
And even if it doesn't suit their agenda, at the very least, it distracts people from talking about antitrust enforcement and the security state.
Yeah. And there's always another different minority group that you can escalate to and support.
Of course.
We talk about the feminism movement. Like, the feminist movement was big, like in the early 2000s. I remember it being much bigger.
Yeah.
And then it kind of started hitting its popularity, and all of a sudden that group started disappeared, and then all of a sudden, like, the LGBTQ
Right.
victimhood mentality kind of replaced them almost. And then it was kind of like that mentality because, oh, well, you don't want, this is a feminist, so it's a female movement. But they're like, oh, well, we don't know if that's going to gain traction. And then they move to the LGBTQs. Also, now you can be whatever, genders are relevant, sex are relevant. You can choose this. So then the feminist narrative no longer fit their need, whatever the narrative need is. So they got replaced by a different group. Mm-hmm. And same thing like Black Lives Matter, like BLM. One day when they're disappeared, they'll be gone because they'll serve no more use for pushing the narrative, or they won't be allowed enough voice. And so they'll be discarded. There's always another group that you can use to be a victim in order to advance your narrative.
And of course, these groups are, isn't it so convenient how easy they are to hate? Because they are so entitled, and they are full to the brim of weak individuals, weak and petty individuals who are extremely irrational. And by the way, there are groups on the conservative side where it's the exact same, exact same nonsense going on. But and then hopefully you'd have people that are on the other side of the aisle that are having these same discussions, talking about how maybe focusing on Nazis and alt-right and KKK members is probably, and white supremacists is probably not very beneficial because it doesn't adequately explain our opposition. But then at the end of the day, like I've said many times now in a lot of different videos, our opposition, all of us, we all have the same opposition. It's corporate America, Wall Street, and the security state. I can't state it enough. They're in everything. They got their fingers in our politicians and media, the universities now. It's in everything. And there's a lot to talk about. Too much for one video. But hope that we give you what's to chew about. Now, hopefully our discussions will in the future obviously take on various forms. But we want more long-winded discussions, because the discussions that we're having right now are discussions we've had before multiple times. A lot of them.
We've had this. This isn't the first time we've talked about these things. But this is also the case. Like most people, when you look online, you don't see people discussing things as individuals. Like it's all like, well, our group this attacks that group and that group attacks this group. That's not really how the real world works. Like with our social media presence and our online mentality, it's like, oh, I'm this group, so I got to attack that group. But if you were to take, even a random individual who supports BLM, just a random person who's, not way into the movement but supports them, if you sat down with them, like we're doing chair to chair, looked each other in the eye, spent some time to look at the actual facts, then there might be an actual change. But as it happens, everybody's so tribal these days that you just waste a lot of time shouting at each other online and nothing ever gets accomplished, or you attack straw men or you attack a group that's irrelevant instead of looking at the foundational issue. So hopefully these talks that we're having, these interactions will.
And one thing we're not going to do, so we can pull statistics on these. We can look at crime statistics, demographics, and we can actually point out the fallacies in these movements. But it's been done. It's continued to be done, and I don't think it's worthwhile. I'm trained in statistics, and I'm not going to touch it. I mean, I have touched it, but I'm not going to talk about it in front of the camera. It's not. It doesn't matter. It's if anyone who does that at this point, since it's already been disproven, is falling into the trap of this camp versus that camp.
We'll see where these conversations go from here. If you like this video, make sure to hit a like. If you dislike it, you can dislike it too. Subscribe to both of our channels. We'll upload this on both, so we'll have it on both our channels you can watch. And maybe throw down in the comments down below. Put down there, what you thought about this video, what you liked about our discussion, if you like the style, and put some topics in the comments that you want to hear us talk about. Now, we'll always have topics that we both want to discuss, but we want to hear from you guys. Hear the things that you guys want to hear us talk about. Hear two individuals going more in depth, looking at foundational issues, not just peripheral issues, not just straw man attacks. And let's hear what you guys actually want to hear us talk about. Hopefully this video was informative, guys. See you on the next one.